Hello, John Keel.
Who is this?
My name is Indrid Cold.
Unless, of course, you're Gordon Smallwood.
Your father was born in Racine, Wisconsin. He lived in a green house on Monroe Street. You don't remember how your mother looked?
Okay, you got my attention. Where's my watch?
In your shoe. Under the bed.
It's a cold night in West Virginia on November 2nd, 1966. Woodrow Derenberger, a sewing machine salesman, is returning from a business trip when he has to pull off on the side of the road to adjust a sewing machine in the back of his truck. Little did he know that the events that were going to follow would alter his life forever. Once he was back on the road, Derenberger noticed a bunch of lights in front of him and believed that they belonged to a bunch of cop cars, so he decided to stop. However, these lights didn't belong to cop cars. They belonged to an aircraft that looked like a kerosene lamp chimney.
As soon as I had stopped, there was a door opened in the side of this vehicle, and this man stepped out and came directly to me, or came to the truck. He walked to the right-hand side of the truck, and he told me to roll down the window. He asked me to roll down the window on my right-hand side of my truck. And I'd done what he asked. And this man stood there, and he first asked me what I was called. And I knew he meant my name, and I told him my name. And he asked me, he said, why are you frightened? He said, don't be frightened, we wish you no harm. He said, we mean you no harm, we wish you only happiness. And I told him my name, and when I told him my name, he said he was called Cold.
That was Woodrow Derenberger, speaking with Ronald Maines of WRAP-TV in Parkersburg, West Virginia, just one day after Derenberger's encounter with the chilling entity known as Indrid Cold. Present at this interview are representatives from the state police, Wood County Airport, Parkersburg Police, and even the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base out of Dayton, Ohio. Indrid Cold possesses a distinctive wide grin, with his arms folded and his hands tucked under his armpits. What made this encounter even more unsettling was that Cold's smile never wavered. It never changed because Cold spoke telepathically. And this unsettling, unchanging expression is actually how Indrid Cold got the moniker the Smiling Man. Following this initial interview, reports began to trickle in. Several witnesses claimed to have actually seen Derenberger talking to a mysterious man on the side of the road, and soon others would come forward with their encounters with Indrid Cold. One account actually describes a man who was hailed down on the side of the road by Indrid Cold, but he was too terrified to pull over. On November 4th, Derenberger would have his second encounter with Indrid Cold. Derenberger was driving back from Pomeroy, Ohio with a friend when they started to get a tingling above their foreheads. And instantly, Derenberger knew that Cold was trying to contact him. Derenberger would state that, Mr. Cold suggested that I slow down and drive very carefully, and said that his ship was high directly over my truck, and that he was following me. He told me that the first time he had contacted me, he had only asked me questions to calm me and settle my fears. At this second contact, I was not frightened, and he told me repeatedly to drive very carefully. I had a feeling that I cannot explain. The feeling was in my head, not pain, but the sensation that I was hearing my own voice with his words. He also told me that their time was not exactly as ours, that they have 3 seasons, planting, harvesting, and cold, whereas we have 4 winters, spring, summer, and fall. He said that his people had a life expectancy of 125 to 175 of our Earth years. Over the following month, Derenberger's encounters with Cold would escalate dramatically. Derenberger would actually chronicle this incredible journey in his 1971 book, Visitors from Lanulos. Lanulos is Indrid Cold's home planet. This book is 15 chapters and is incredibly wild. By chapter 5 alone, Derenberger claims that him and Cold traveled to the Amazon jungle, went to the moon, and even decided to stop by Saturn to check out its agricultural society before they even reached Lanulos itself. Although Derenberger wasn't permitted to leave the ship him and Indrid Cold traveled on due to contamination and vaccination reasons, Derenberger would say that Lanulos and its people lived in a utopian society. The people of Lanulos believed that they were all equal at birth and they didn't understand hate. They had no war, and that everybody was happy. After his excursion with Indrid Cold, Derenberger's life would forever be altered, and not for the better. Derenberger's house would be plagued by phone calls. Sometimes the phone calls would be people threatening him to have him stop writing his book. Other times it would be just weird electronic sounds or even silence. There would even be onlookers at nighttime who would trespass onto his property, hoping to catch a glimpse of Indrid Cold or just see some type of UFO activity. Derenberger's family would endure years of harassing phone calls, and anytime they lost a job or lost friendship, they would blame Derenberger's extraordinary tales. And eventually, Derenberger would suffer from painful headaches and depression, and his wife would eventually divorce him. Derenberger ultimately had to move away from the area, far, far away, to escape his unwanted notoriety. Interestingly, there is actually an Indrid Cold story that predates Derenberger's. This original story takes place in New Jersey on an October night when two boys are walking down the street. The boys see a strange tall man standing in some brush beneath a turnpike. Jimmy Yonchitis, one of the boys, nudges Martin Munoff and says, "Who's that guy standing behind you?" I looked around and there he was, behind that fence, just standing there. He pivoted around and looked right at us. And then he grinned a big old grin. The man was over 6 feet tall and he was dressed in a sparkling green coverall costume that shimmered and seemed to reflect the streetlights. There was a wide black belt around his waist. He had a very dark complexion and little round eyes, real beady, set far apart. The boys couldn't remember seeing any hair, ears, or nose on the figure. They actually didn't even see the figure's hands. But the one thing they do remember is that big old smiling grin. This encounter was told in author John Keel's 1970 book, Strange Creatures from Time and Space. The other notable Indrid Cold story hails from Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Yes, the very same Point Pleasant notorious for the Mothman sightings. This account comes from the Lilly family, who had been experiencing poltergeist activity and strange diamond-shaped lights in their home. One night, their daughter Linda awoke to find a tall, broad man standing over her bed. Linda would recall that it was a man, a big man, very broad. I couldn't see his face very well, but I could see that he was grinning at me. He walked around the bed and stood right over me. I screamed again and hid under the covers. When I looked again, he was gone. So with these accounts in mind, the question shifts to, what is Indrid Cold? And there's two primary theories behind what he is. The first narrative aligns with Derenberger's, and that Indrid Cold is just an alien from Lanulos trying to understand humanity. The second theory, though, this is where things get juicy. This theory proposes that Indrid Cold is in fact a Men in Black. And no, not one like Tommy Lee Jones and Will Smith. And to understand this theory, we actually need to rewind back to 1947 to a man, his son, and their dog in a boat. And yes, this is the can of worms that I mentioned in the Mothman episode. In 1947, Harold Dahl was gathering logs on Puget Sound, a vast interconnected system of marine waterways in Washington state, when he witnessed something extraordinary. 6 donut-shaped objects hovered half a mile above his boat. Suddenly, one of the objects discharged metallic debris from about 1,500 feet. showering down on Harold and his family. Tragically, their dog was killed, though Harold and his son would survive. The very next morning, Dahl received a chilling visit from a man in a black suit. At a subsequent diner, this mysterious figure recounted Dahl's traumatic event in astonishing detail, even telling him, "What I have said is proof to you that I know a great deal more about this experience of yours than you will want to believe." Harold was explicitly warned not to speak about his incident or bad things would happen to him. This entire account was later chronicled in Gray Barker's 1956 book, They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers. The Harold Dahl incident effectively encapsulates the classic portrayal of Men in Black. They're a mysterious group who appear after someone has encountered UFO or UAPs, an identified aerial phenomenon, and their purpose? Simply to gather information and, more often than not, to silence witnesses. Their signature look, as you've probably guessed, is a black suit. But other common identifiers can be a black fedora, dark sunglasses, black cars, and often they arrive in groups of 2 or 3. Think less government agent and more the Blues Brothers, but far more ominous Blues Brothers. There is one incident that we have to talk about, and it happened back in 2008. And this is an incident that most Men in Black believers point to as definitive evidence that Men in Black exist. In Niagara Falls, New York, hotel manager Shane Silvar and a hotel security guard said they saw a UFO outside a hotel window. 3 weeks after Shane and the guards saw the UFO, Men in Black visited the hotel. Witnesses of the Men in Black were terrified and said that the Men in Black were looking for Silvar and the guard. Every witness described them similarly to how Men in Black are typically identified as. And what makes this encounter notable is, well, you can take a look at it yourself.
I was talking with my tour guest, and one of them asked to talk to me. She came in my office, the same as my bellman, and she said, "I need to tell you about something that happened. I heard that you heard that there were some men looking for you." And I said, "Yes." And she said, "They asked a few questions about you, and they said strange things that I didn't understand. And they were talking about governments and conspiracies, and none of it made any sense to me." But she goes, "They were very, very scary." And I said, "Well, why were they scary?" And she said, "They had no facial hair, none." She said they had no eyebrows, no eyelashes, nothing. Their hair looked like they had a wig on, like it was attached to their hat, like it wasn't even real. And she said, and the scariest thing, their eyes were so big and so blue that they almost hypnotized me a little bit. And she goes, "And you're going to think I'm crazy when I tell you this, but I swear they knew what I was thinking."
Now, this video is undeniably interesting. And in fact, I wish I had more videos like this going forward on all the topics I'm gonna cover because it's fun evidence. However, there are skeptics to it. They basically say that everyone's blowing the significance of this video out of proportion. To be fair, I'm also kind of in that camp. I don't think this is definitive proof that Men in Black exist. I should state this moving forward. I'm in the I want to believe but am skeptical camp when it comes to aliens and ghosts and cryptids and just everything paranormal. And why is that? Because I've grown up on the internet. We all know how easy it is to fake stuff. And people do it for a myriad of reasons. I mean, the pursuit of internet fame is a powerful motivator. So many people want to be internet famous. So many people want to be an influencer on Instagram, or want to be the next big YouTuber, or want to be the next big streamer on Twitch, whatever it may be. People fake their personalities or fake situations all the time to be internet famous. And in fact, because this is 2008, so Twitch wasn't a thing, Instagram wasn't a thing, YouTube certainly wasn't the same in 2008 as it is now. However, do y'all remember Balloon Boy? Yes, if you don't remember this was a big scandal. A kid had disappeared and the family believed the kid disappeared in a weather balloon and was taken away and was going to die when this weather balloon eventually crashed. This was all faked. The kid, I believe, was up in the attic the entire time, and the dad created this controversy because he wanted a reality TV show. The dad wanted, at the time, to be reality TV famous, which is the equivalent of being internet famous. Now, I'm even going on to say that these men in black simply could be unusually dressed businessmen. They were just men who are bohemian in their nature. And I'm also going to say, in the early 2000s, it wasn't uncommon to see people wearing trench coats and fedoras. That's just kind of some of the style dudes wore. And it also could be a marketing stunt by the hotel. Who knows? We see places actively market that they are haunted to get people to stay overnight. I mean, the Queen Mary is a famous location that does this. Now, I will say we don't really see this in terms of aliens and UFO related activity, with Skinwalker Ranch being the one caveat to that. If the men in black are real, who are they working for? Well, there's really two theories behind who they work for. Theory number one, the men in black are government agents. Now, this is the most straightforward theory, and it's simply that the men in black are working for the US government, actively suppressing UFO and UAP information. This theory, though, does gain some traction from individuals like Richard Doty, who is a former Air Force Special Investigations Officer, and he allegedly admitted to infiltrating UFO communities and spreading misinformation. Doty himself claimed to have acted as a Men in Black, and that's all I'm gonna cover really on the US government and aliens in this video, because there is a lot to that, and I probably will have to do a whole video series on the US government and aliens. Theory number two, the Men in Black are working for aliens. This second theory posits that the Men in Black are in fact aliens working for aliens to suppress information. So they're basically doing the same job, just working for a different boss, if you will. And if you believe Indrid Cold is a Men in Black, you kind of believe this theory that the Men in Black are aliens and not so much US government officials. I've covered quite a bit in this video, but there is a giant winged, not so moth-like shaped man frantically fluttering around in the room still that we need to cover. And it's, how is Indrid Cold related to Mothman? If you've watched my Mothman episode, which you totally should by the way, you know that I mentioned this. I'm going to briefly mention Indrid Cold right now. He's kind of a secondary character in the Mothman mythos, and some place Indrid Cold or the Smiling Man in Point Pleasant, West Virginia during Mothman sightings. Now I gotta confess something to all of you beautiful people. I'm not the biggest Indrid Cold enthusiast. In fact, I've never really looked into Indrid Cold before this. So going into writing this episode, I initially believed that this was simply going to be an alien on some kind of cosmic goose chase searching for Mothman, a coyote looking for a roadrunner, if you will. Researching videos like this really makes you think on things, and that's why I do this. I began the series to really challenge myself and look deeper into the things I was fascinated by as a kid and am still fascinated by. And so it's here I learned that the only real connection between Indrid Cold and Mothman is fabricated. It's made up. And perhaps my bias is showing right now, but do you remember the clip I showed at the very beginning of this episode? That is a clip from the 2002 movie, The Mothman Prophecies. It's an adaptation from the 1975 book by the same name, written by one of the 20th century's most influential paranormal investigators, John Keel. In fact, John Keel is the one widely credited for popularizing the concept of the Men in Black and coining the term MIB. Although I think you and I can both agree that that acronym was probably gonna be popularized at one point. After interviewing witnesses firsthand of both Indrid Cold and Mothman, this is actually the very basis for the Mothman Prophecies. Keel, while not explicitly saying that Cold is MIB, undeniably drew a connection between Indrid Cold and Mothman. There is one H.G. Wells, Jules Verne, sci-fi influence, magic-loving, paranormal investigator elephant in the room we need to talk about. Honestly, it's like a Matryoshka doll of elephants in this room. The uncomfortable truth for many is that John Keel has been accused of being a fraud many, many times. Or rather, that he may have fabricated a significant portion of his writings to push his own agenda. Much of Keel's work is controversial, not so much for the subject matter, but because he's been widely accused of inventing stories, with many of his ideas lacking evidence. Skeptics argue that Keel relied excessively on anecdotal accounts and subjective experiences. A prime example of this, you know that Indrid Cold story involving the two boys in New Jersey we discussed earlier? Yeah, that's a John Keel story. And in fact, many believe that that story is entirely fabricated. Why? Because John Keel never explained how he learned about the event or how he supposedly interviewed the boys. And tons of people who have done research into that story say they can't find those two boys, that those two guys just don't exist, that Keel totally made up this entire story to push the Indrid Cold narrative. In fact, further compounding on the John Keel skepticism, in a 2002 Skeptical Inquirer article titled Gray Barker's Book of Bunk. Yeah, we've talked about Gray Barker before. John C. Sherwood, a former business associate of UFO researcher Gray Barker, analyzed private letters between Keel and Barker during Keel's investigation into Indrid Cold and Mothman. Sherwood reported significant discrepancies between Keel's contemporary notes and what he would later publish in his first book on the Mothman sightings, which directly questions the book's accuracy. There's even a fun little theory that Gray Barker himself was prank calling John Keel in West Virginia during his investigation, and Keel reportedly wrote on these mysterious calls and said this was firsthand evidence of Men in Black interference. Where do I stand on Indrid Cold? This journey into the story has been really complex for me. Again, I initially expected this to be a very straightforward story, and I truly believed that Indrid Cold was simply a guy chasing down Mothman, and that's how it appears on the surface. Deciphering Derenberger's account was particularly challenging because you want to believe people. And I know a lot of people hate this, but I truly believe that Derenberger believes that he had an encounter with Indrid Cold. But looking at everything else, it is so out there. Just the stories that he makes up are just wild. And so that made me believe that maybe Derenberger was suffering from a mental illness, or maybe he had some type of psychotic break or something happening in his life. Now, you couple this with the UFO hysteria that was going on, starting with Roswell and continuing into the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and then you put the fraudulent John Keel as the cherry on top of this messy Indrid Cold cake. It just seems so far-fetched. It just seems that a lot of this was someone taking advantage of somebody else to try to become bigger in the paranormal universe. I'm talking about Keel taking advantage of Derenberger. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are sitting there going, no, Derenberger sounds crazy. However, Derenberger actually sought medical attention. And according to Derenberger's psychiatrist, he had a clean bill of health. There was no chemical imbalances in Derenberger at all. He didn't have a psychotic break. He wasn't bipolar. He wasn't hallucinating. He was clean. The guy was healthy. And fun fact to all of this too, allegedly, while Derenberger was under medical attention, he was routinely visited by a peculiar man by the name of Indrid Cold. For those less familiar with the UFO and UAP community, a recurring theme among alleged alien abductees is the narrative that aliens show them their peaceful societies, often contrasting them with humanity's self-destructive tendencies and the impending doom of Earth. I want you to consider this context. Woodrow Derenberger's story of Indrid Cold takes place during the latter years of Vietnam. Now, I'm not gonna give a full mini documentary series on Vietnam because There are plenty of Vietnam documentaries out there, but there is one big cultural movement that came from Vietnam, and that was the hippie movement, the peace and love movement. I'm not suggesting Derenberger is a hippie, but a ton of Americans were disgruntled at the time with Vietnam. A ton of Americans believed that we shouldn't have been in Vietnam, that this was a meaningless war, and peace and love came from this to contrast America's brutality in Vietnam. It's possible that Derenberger maybe shared this same sentiment. This cultural backdrop adds a layer of the skepticism to the peaceful alien narrative. Now, as for John Keel being involved, I think I've made my stance pretty clear on him. I fully believe the dude's a charlatan. Very influential in the ufologist world, but a charlatan nonetheless. And in fact, Keel had some pretty interesting ideas. I mean, he came up with the whole theory that aliens aren't from space, but they're actually extra-dimensional, four-dimensional beings that kind of blip into our existence. Keel ultimately appears as a guy who sought to profit off of Derenberger's experiences and may have exploited him for his own gain. As we saw, Keel's book came out in '75, Derenberger's book came out in '71. Derenberger may have been influenced to write his book about Lanulos from John Keel himself. John Keel may have said, you know, this is all skepticism or speculation, by the way. This isn't anything proven in my research. But I totally think that Keel may have tried to get Derenberger in that ufologist, paranormal investigation sphere. That maybe he was like, write books on it, dude. It's popular. Or maybe there's some profit to it. There's some pretty big black marks on any truth that may be hidden in there, though. In the end, the story of Indrid Cold, to me, has become less about definitive proof of aliens, or men in black, or government cover-ups, or conspiracies, or whatever. It's more about a man who had the experience of a lifetime. And unfortunately, it's about a man who had his life derailed because of this experience. Perhaps there was a sewing machine salesman who was visited by a grinning man from the planet Lanulos who showed a glimpse of universal peace. And perhaps that concept right there of universal peace is too much for humanity to even think about. Perhaps it shows that people will always take advantage of a situation in which they think they can benefit from. Maybe this whole notion of people being born equal, of there being no war and no hate, is tragically just as outlandish as a smiling man from outer space, a shadowy man in black trying to cover up evidence of UFOs.